Alrighty, we are here with Andreea Ion Cojocaru. She is the co-founder of Numera. She's the CEO of Numera. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, so you're doing a lot of interesting stuff within, VR, AR, and the whole Metaverse space. The point of, this session today and all the guests we've had on is really kind of go behind the curtains of what's happening in the space, understand, what the developers are building, how the gamers are playing, how real commercial business is being developed. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing at Numera, and then we'll go from there.
I am a VR developer. I'm also an architect, and my entire company comes into this space from architecture as a background. And we believe we have a unique angle to virtual reality because as architects, we understand the connection between space and behavior in space, human behavior in space. And we're interested in finding out in what ways is this particular technology transformational. Because we believe all technology changes you, and we are working on projects that explore how this particular spatial technology can change you.
Got it. So talk about, what are you trying to do specifically at Numera yourself? What kind of value are you trying to bring to the table that you don't think exists today in the current environment of, call it the 2D world?
We believe that transformational tools should be made transparent. Developers should be clear to the end users how those transformational tools exactly work, how the users will be affected. And we believe in putting the controls in the hands of the users. So within that framework, we are pursuing two types of projects. The first type is looking at how these tools can change and transform the individual and how the individual can take control of that process, and how these tools can transform communities. So how that looks like at a level of the community. And we have projects going on both sides of this.
Got it. And are these projects, I'm assuming, are again more based off of your background, which is architect. We've seen a lot of use cases around architecture where seeing spaces in a virtual environment, in a kind of 3D world, and whether it's building a building from the ground up, whether it's retrofitting inside of the building. Talk about some of the use cases that you think VR brings to architecture that doesn't exist. Like what kind of tools, like from a valuable use case that you think can be extracted in 3D that is just totally different from VR, so we can understand what all the hype is about specifically in Metaverse and 3D VR AR mixed reality as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with the individual level. Because of virtual reality, architecture for the first time can become something everyone does. It doesn't cost millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions anymore to experience space. You can put a headset on and you can play around with designing a house or with the proportions of your living room without actually putting the money to experience that change and how that space makes you feel. And we have our own in-house tool in which we put clients that come to us for architectural services, and we experience little miracles all the time. We have had clients design their own kitchens, design their own terraces, furnish their own living room. And the degree of freedom and to some extent personal transformation that these people experience when they go and customize things that previously they thought were way out of bounds for their abilities is just amazing to see. And at the level of communities and society, we have a big project coming up very, very soon. So I can't give too many details, but it's looking at the idea of virtual urbanism and how we can use virtual reality, not just for architecture, but at the urban scale. And what does that mean for the communities that potentially can form or be transformed by having a tool that allows us to tackle such large scales?
Yeah, no, interesting. Speaking of communities, obviously, where are you located today? We've as I said, mentioned before, there's a lot of globalization happening in the VR space. I think a lot of that has to do because it is VR, because it is you can transport in a sense to other communities in real time, or the community is in space, I guess. That it's different than some of the other kind of platforms that exist today. Talk about, obviously where you're from, why you think VR has potentially taken off in terms of maybe the developer community, where you are, and just globally in general. What's your thoughts around, the globalization of VR in terms of talent and development?
You mean from the implementation perspective?
Just in
As
general,
a
like from a talent perspective, we've noticed that talent is much more global than kind of traditional technology. I think like 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the technology talent was located in Silicon Valley, and what you've seen, I think, over the last, call it 5, 10 years, is a migration outside of that, and actually some of it forming in other countries. Talk about, talent in general. Are you, where you are local, what's the talent look like relative to, let's say, 5, 10 years ago? Is it continuing to blossom up, stay the same? Just your views on global talent and where it is.
We don't think of local talent anymore. I guess this is the
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
the answer to your question. We hire people from all over. We do not take into account the local community in any way anymore. Communities are now formed primarily over the internet. They might have local chapters where people meet in person, but all the communities I'm part of, including my own people, we're all over the world. So that's absolutely the reality today. But there's a second angle to this that has to do with VR specifically, because it's a new technology and we're still figuring out what this is about. We're actually having people from different disciplines step into what until now, or what many see as a technology field, or as something that's for maybe people with a background in computer games. So we come from architecture. There are people that come from theater, for example. There are people that come from all sorts of other backgrounds and disciplines to produce, award-winning virtual applications. So the shift in talent doesn't have to do necessarily with geography, although that shift is definitely massive. What's going on right now? It has to do with breaking disciplinary boundaries.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, you're seeing there's a lot of creatives in the space, just in general. And I think, again, architect, gaming, creation, music, other things, I think you're seeing a lot of elements of that. You talked about art and some other areas that you mentioned. Speak a little bit about, maybe you've been doing this for a while now. Some of, like, what is your favorite, like, tools that you use that are, VR, AR related, outside of, some of the projects that you guys are doing internally?
The beauty of being in a new industry is that the situation with the tools that we have at our disposal is a bit of a mess. And for people like myself, that's really exciting. And when we started a company as architects in virtual reality, we realized that, all right, the obvious thing to do would be not to design architecture using a traditional 2D screen-based 3D modeling tool, is to just do it inside VR. But there was no tool for that at the time. So that's how we decided to build our own in-house tool. So speaking of tools and workflows, we started by building our own, and that has grown and grown and taking us down interesting paths. So there are many, many hardships, including like, oh, we don't have the right kind of tools. But those opened up, at least for us, absolutely humongous opportunities as well, because we embraced the fact that we need to make our own, and we wrote our own tools.
Yeah, wow, that's yeah, it's builders building, where nothing exists, or limited stuff exists, and obviously you've seen the ecosystem continue to grow and grow and grow. So more and more tools, and it's the ecosystem helping the ecosystem. As someone makes a tool for you that maybe you didn't have the time and resources to build, they're building that, and then you're building something that potentially they're using, and kind of that virtuous cycle. Speak about some of the different platforms that are out there. Obviously, you built some of your projects. There's Oculus, obviously, or Meta, in terms of their store. There's other platforms that exist as well. Like, talk about the ecosystems on the respective platforms. Where's your general focus at? Is it, Metas, or is it some of the others?
Right now it's Meta, because that's where the users are. So the most popular headset at the moment is the Quest. And we are all hoping in the community that more competition will enter that space. And we all believe that it will. It has to. For many, many reasons, we need more competition in terms of the ecosystems that are able to attract users. Because for us as developers, we need to deploy our applications in ecosystem that already have at least some degree of users inside them.
Yeah, that makes sense. In the mobile phone era, obviously it's basically a two ecosystem. It eventually became a two ecosystem race. Do you think this space is going to be probably somewhat similar? I think a lot of people are waiting for Apple to come out with something, which keeps some of the iOS developers kind of probably somewhat engaged on that space and building there. Do you envision this being I doubt it'll be a single ecosystem, but in general, it probably, as we've seen, whether it's computing, whether you have Apple again and Microsoft, and then on the mobile side you have Google and Apple. Do you think a VR/AR is going to be a similar dynamic, or do you think it's going to be multiple different platforms that exist in this space relative to historical norms?
My hope is multiple. But there's a caveat to that. We really need standards. And many teams with brilliant people are in the industry are working right now on standards. Because even if you look at the situation right now with mobile apps, it costs small indie developers a huge amount of money and effort to develop for Android and then for iOS because they're not compatible with each other. So there is a fair amount of headache in developing and maintaining those two different versions of the same game or of the same application. So I am hoping we will have a lot of platforms in the ecosystem. I think that is very healthy for developers because the more options we have, of course, the more we can demand and the friendlier they have to be towards us developers. But they really need to agree on standards, because if we are in a situation where we have to develop and maintain the same application for 10 different platforms and they all require 10 different types of inputs and technical requirements, then we're just not going to see much improvement. Then developers are going to give up.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Like 10 years ago, we made an application and building for, the Android ecosystem was a mess, just given that, there was different form factors. So you weren't only just building for the platform, you were building for the device. And that was even a challenge, which is, I think part of the reasoning why, Apple at the time had a single device with a single form factor, which made it easier for developers to build on. And it speaks to what you're talking about, where, yes, the developer can get leverage if, there's multiple and there's like competition going on, but does the complexity overweigh the leverage that you would be getting in terms of, let's say, revenue share and things like that? Big picture, there's some sort of balance in there. It's probably hard to judge where that eventually lands. Talk about the Meta Quest Pro. I don't know if you or your colleagues have tested it out, learned about the specs, seen what it does. Any idea of this is different from the Quest 2? Clearly, it's a different product. It's much more around mixed reality as opposed to just purely virtual reality. What does that do to someone like yourself and the company you're building? Given architect, I think architecture in general, it's a collaborative effort that tends to happen there. Talk about the new device and your just initial thoughts on what that means and signals to the rest of VR, AR, and the world.
I have not tested the new device because they are illegal in Germany. And actually, this also speaks to a lot of things. When Meta decided all of a sudden that they're going to force people to use Facebook accounts and eliminate Oculus accounts on the user side, the German government sued them, and that is still ongoing. So the day after the Quest Pro was announced, it was also announced in Germany that selling them in Germany is not permitted yet. So it's a good example of the turmoil going on sometimes in the ecosystem and the kind of difficulties that we're dealing with on many levels.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's probably why, obviously, they within the last 6 months, I think it was like 6 months ago, now you can have a Quest account or a Meta Quest account as opposed to using your Facebook login. So that's obviously to try to alleviate that issue that's going on there. We have a couple more minutes here until we branch off, but we tend to try to have 3 questions for every guest. First is what inning do you think we are in terms of calling call it the Metaverse. It's a baseball game. We love baseball games, but 1 through 9 is essentially how we're thinking about it. What inning do you think we're in? 1 through 9.
2.5.
2.5. That's right in the ballpark of a lot of people. I mean, we had someone that the game hasn't even started yet. And then we've had some people talk about, the 4th inning. The next question is really around, what's one project that you've seen outside of, again, your what you're doing, and you could even use that as an example if you want, but that really excites you generally.
People trying to reinvent language and how we type to make that something more suited for the spatial affordances of virtual reality. Because if you've ever tried to type on a virtual keyboard, you probably realize quite fast that it's an absolutely horrendous thing. So if we want to be able to type in this space, we really need to rethink everything about keyboard and fingers.
Yeah, no doubt. Did you see the Meta Connect event where they had the neural kind of ability to kind of type / move things around without even moving your fingers? I thought that was they bought Control CTRL, I believe it is what it is, like a couple of years ago. And I think people were questioning, like, what is this thing? And sure enough, now we're starting to see, the ambition, which I think it just speaks to the problem they're trying to solve, which I think is what you talk about, which is trying to figure out ways to make it much more a seamless experience for typing, less controllers, more control without physical objects. It's pretty fascinating. Last question: do you think the Metaverse is overhyped, underhyped, or perfectly hyped?
I don't think we really know what it is, so I would stay neutral on that. In terms of what the media is writing on, what they seem to think the Metaverse is definitely overhyped.
Yeah, no,
in terms of what I believe it is and what many people in the VR community think it is, we're just at the beginning, and it's underhyped. The true Metaverse is underhyped.
Sure. That's funny. We've gotten like similar responses where the term overhyped, the actual building happening underneath the scenes, behind the scenes, which in the media you're typically hearing about avatar legs and some other things, as opposed to we had a use case where someone was talking about doctor training or surgery training that's happening in the space. So preventing actually a live surgery to be your first surgery as a doctor, and actually doing some of this stuff in virtual spaces is not only smarter, but it's it's cheaper and more productive in terms of the outcome. But we don't really hear about that in terms of when you turn on the television every day. So that's the stuff I think that you're talking about, which is a lot of that kind of utility is being underhyped relative to, call it the term, Metaverse. Cool. With that, I wanted to give you 1 second to where people can find more about you and your company, and kind of just follow along some of the projects that you guys are building.
It's best to get in touch with me over Twitter and LinkedIn, over the Numera handle.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, that is it. I appreciate you coming on today, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you so much.